Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. I'd like to give you a brief video tour around the Canon EOS 5D Mark II. Here it is, the 5D Mark II, and I've got it mounted here with the Canon EF24 to 105mm lens. This is a high quality general purpose zoom and an ideal match for the Mark II. Indeed, you'll find many Mark IIs available in the kit with this very lens. And if you'd like to find out more about it, you can check out our full review of this lens at CameraLabs.com. Now, the new 5D Mark II is of course the successor to the original 5D, which was the first affordable full-frame DSLR. Now, 3 years has passed since that model, so while the new Mark II may share pretty much the same body and autofocus system as its predecessor, almost everything else has changed. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the highlights. We'll start with resolution, as the 5D Mark II has received a significant boost over its predecessor from 12.8 to 21.1 megapixels. That in fact equals the resolution of Canon's flagship EOS 1DS Mark III, though Canon does say that this sensor on the 5D Mark II is an improved version and describes it as delivering the best quality from any EOS DSLR to date. And you can see results for yourself at CameraLabs.com. Now, this sensor in the 5D Mark II, like its predecessor, is a full frame model. This means it's larger than the general crop frame sensors that you find in most DSLRs. In fact, it's the same size as a frame of 35mm film, and this gives it two main advantages. First of all, because it's the same size as 35mm film, there's no field reduction factor with lenses, so there's no need to multiply it by 1.5 or 1.6 times. The focal length you see is what you actually get. 24mm lens will give you 24mm coverage. And because the sensor is larger, it's also more sensitive to light, so that allows full frame cameras to deliver better results at higher sensitivities or pack in higher resolutions without any compromise on noise levels. And once again, you can see results for that at CameraLabs.com. It's not just the resolution that's received a significant boost with the Mark II, the maximum sensitivity is also much higher than before. The 5D Mark II has a maximum official sensitivity of 6400 ISO, but if you go for the extended ISO option, you can take that all the way up to 25,600 ISO, so that's 3 stops higher than the extended option on its predecessor. Around the back of the 5D Mark II, you'll find a 3-inch VGA screen, so that's both bigger and much more detailed than the one in its predecessor, and it's also brighter and easier to view in direct sunlight. As a modern camera, the 5D Mark II of course also features live view facilities along with face detection, and none of that was available on the original 5D. Canon's also improved the continuous shooting speed. It's up from the 3 frames per second of the original 5D to 3.9 frames per second on the Mark II. So that's not quite as fast as the 5 frames per second of its big rivals, the Sony A900 and the Nikon D700, but it's still an improvement on what you had before. So here's how that sounds in practice. The 5D Mark II becomes Canon's second ever DSLR to feature its latest Digic 4 processor, and this has a number of tricks up its sleeve. First of all, peripheral illumination correction, which can improve the darkening that you sometimes see in the corners of some lenses. You also get highlight tone priority and the auto lighting optimizer, two features that were also seen on the earlier EOS 50D. And like that model, the 5D Mark II also features autofocus micro adjustment. This is a great feature for many lenses which don't quite focus as you'd expect on the camera. This allows you to shift the focusing point a little bit forward or a little bit backwards to ensure that all of your pictures come out as sharp as you expect them to. Even the 5D Mark II's battery has had an overhaul. It's the first model from Canon to actually feature an accurate percentage indication of how much charge is remaining, although you will need to go into a menu to find it. Within that menu though, you'll also find a conditioning report on the battery itself, so the camera will let you know when it thinks that battery needs to be replaced. The biggest new feature on the 5D Mark II though is of course its movie mode. This makes it Canon's first DSLR to offer the facility, and it also makes it only the second ever DSLR to have a movie mode after Nikon's D90. You're watching an example of it right now. I'm stood about 2 feet in front of the Mark II, and the sound you hear is recorded using the built-in microphone, although there is a socket for connecting an external microphone for better quality. Now, unlike the Nikon D90, whose high definition movies were in the 720p format, the 5D Mark II records them in nothing less than the 1080p, that's full HD at 30 frames per second and stored in the H.264 format as a QuickTime movie file. Here are a few examples of how you might use it. This first sequence was filmed with the 5D Mark II mounted on a normal tripod and using the 24-105mm lens zoomed out and with stabilization off. First of all, with the lens fully zoomed out, you're capturing a much wider field than most camcorders, and the result is also very clean and detailed. Now of course it is possible to zoom the lens while you're filming. Here again the 24-105 zooming out, although it's quite difficult to do that at a constant speed. This next sequence is following some action with image stabilization enabled, so there are some optical artifacts here, but in general the result still looks pretty good. For this next sequence I've included the sound captured by the 5D Mark II's built-in microphone. Now this is a handheld sequence, so what I'm trying to do here is zoom the lens in while I'm following it. And it's quite difficult to do that and still keep the camera held steadily. It's not as easy to do as a normal camcorder. Now of course one of the benefits of using a DSLR for filming video is the opportunity to use different lenses. This was filmed with a 70-300 fully zoomed into 300mm. One of the other benefits is very selective focusing. This kind of effect is very difficult to achieve with a normal camcorder. Here's another example showing how you can really move from one area of focus to another. Now one of the other benefits of filming with a DSLR is potentially low noise and very dim conditions. This bar was fairly dim, but yet we've managed to achieve a very noise-free result here, although it did involve first manually adjusting the exposure as explained in our review at cameralabs.com. Our final sequence was taken with the 5D Mark II mounted at prime focus on the end of a telescope working at an equivalent of 1080mm. The telescope wasn't tracking the moon at the time, so you'll see it gradually move across the frame. We also had to adjust the ISO in order to get the desired exposure. Now let's take a closer look at the control system. The 5D Mark II may share essentially the same body as its predecessor, but there's been some cosmetic changes and also some alterations in some of the controls. For starters, if you have a look under the 5D logo there, you'll see 3 tiny dots. They're for the built-in microphone that's used to record audio in the movie mode. Turning to the upper left side of the body to the command dial, you'll see there's still no scene presets, but there's now the creative auto mode, which is kind of like a beginner friendly version of aperture priority, which we first saw on the 50D. Like its predecessor, there's still no pop-up flash, although you'll notice this plastic surround around the hot shoe here that mates with some of the higher end speedlight flash guns to provide an environmental seal. Over on the upper right hand side you'll see that it's dominated once again by an LCD status screen, that's backlit here. Although eagle-eyed Canon followers will notice that it is an improved version over its predecessor. You now get a better indication of the battery life, you also see the ISO value at all times, and the actual shutter and aperture value is slightly larger than before. Owners of the original 5D will also notice that the functions on these buttons have changed slightly, although these little ridges on the side make it easier to get your finger on these buttons when you're composing through the viewfinder. Speaking of the viewfinder, there's still no curtain switch here, but at least the coverage has improved from 96 to 98%. Turning to the rear of the camera, the controls are pretty much the same as before. You'll notice a new AF on button here for autofocusing in live view, and also the live view button here itself. The screen, as I mentioned earlier, is greatly improved. It's now a 3-inch VGA model, and it features the Q menu system of the earlier 50D. This gives you quick and easy access to various settings. For example, if I push the joystick in here, you'll see this feature here highlighted. I can now move around the screen to whichever setting I want to change, and either turn a dial to adjust that, or press the large set button to go to a dedicated menu. So this makes it very quick and easy to change lots of different settings. If we have a look at the side of the camera, you'll see that the compact flash card compartment is in exactly the same area as before, although this now features improved weather sealing. The 5D Mark II is also compatible with the UDMA standard and will exploit the extra speed of these cards to flush the buffer faster during continuous shooting. As I mentioned earlier, the battery is a new improved version that gives accurate feedback of the charge remaining, and there's also a handful of extra ports on the side. Behind these flaps here, you'll still find a PC Sync flash port and also a port for remote control, but behind this one here, you'll see a new HDMI output. This uses a mini HDMI port, and behind this one here at the bottom, a microphone input for the movie mode. That's a really nice feature to have. After all, there's many camcorders that don't even feature microphone inputs. In part 2 of this video, I'll demonstrate the Mark II's live view facilities, the PC remote control software, and also give you my verdict on this new DSLR. As always, for the full review of this camera, head on over to www.cameralabs.com.